Difficult Life and Career of Dorothy Dandridge. By Haley Paul, September 11, 2024. She was a talent from the start and seemed to be headed for stardom from an incredibly young age. She almost made it, too, but Hollywood was a tough place for a black woman in the 1950s. She enjoyed incredible highs, and her value is still recognized today. Here are facts you didn't know about Dorothy Dandridge. Early struggles. When Dorothy Dandridge was conceived, it looked as though she might already be set up to become a future star. Her mother, Ruby, was an established radio actor and entertainer, and her father, Cyril, was a Baptist minister and cabinet maker. Everything changed 4 months into the pregnancy when Ruby left Cyril and took Dorothy's older sister, Vivian, with her. When Dorothy was born on November 9, 1922, she came into a family where a 22-year-old single mother was trying to support 2 young daughters using whatever income she could get from her work in the arts. From the start, Dorothy's life was destined to be a struggle. Ruby Dandridge was living a life considered scandalous for 1920s Ohio. She was in a romantic relationship with another woman, Geneva Williams. While the two kept the romantic side of their relationship private, they were more open about their business ventures together. At a young age, Vivian and Dorothy were pushed into performing by their mom and stepmom as a song and dance act called the Wonder Children. This might not have been so troublesome, but much of Ruby's time was taken up with her own career, so Geneva became responsible for the bulk of management duties when it came to the girls. Geneva Williams had a temper, and the 2 children were not spared her wrath. By the time the 2 girls were in their teens, they were better known, more simply, as the Dandridge sisters. Promoters loved the young act, and they were soon being booked for legendary venues such as the Cotton Club and the Apollo Theater. While performing at the Cotton Club as a 16-year-old, Dorothy met the man who would become her first love. Harold Nicholas was just 18 months older than Dorothy and part of an act known as the Nicholas Brothers Dancing Team. The pair fell hard for each other, but there was something in their way. The Blitz. By now it was the late 1930s, and the Dandridge sisters' reputation had spread to Europe. Dorothy had only just met Harold Nicholas and yet found herself expected to travel 5,000 miles to complete a tour with Vivian. It seems, however, nobody had taken into account the rather big event taking place in Europe at the time, a little thing known as World War II. The performers arrived in London just in time for the Blitz to force them repeatedly into air raid shelters, where they huddled in fear and discomfort with hundreds of other people. Needless to say, it didn't take long for them to decide that heading back to America was the best course of action. Dorothy, of course, was delighted. Not only would they not have to watch for bombs falling from the sky in America, but Harold Nicholas would be there waiting for her. Going solo. Though she did have some movie appearances under her belt, most of Dorothy's screen work up to 1940 was with the Dandridge sisters act. As the new decade began, however, the younger sister began picking up some work on her own, and she was keen to do more. Hollywood was a tough nut to crack for black actors at that time, but there was a fringe industry in which Dorothy discovered she could earn castings and even be credited for her work. Dorothy Dandridge's first credited solo role was in the 1940 movie, Four Shall Die. The movie flopped, but it was a start. Over the next 2 years, Dorothy earned 3 more solo credits and a 4th as part of an act with the Nicholas brothers. The honeymoon was quickly over. To modern eyes, it might seem moving straight from the family home into marriage might not be the best path for a young actor looking to strike out on their own. For women in the 1940s, however, it was by far the easiest way to rid yourself of childhood ties and, so long as your husband allowed it, start building your own career. In 1942, Dorothy Dandridge married her first love, Harold Nicholson. It should have been a happy ever after story, but it very quickly became apparent that would not be the case. Almost immediately after the wedding, Harold became distant and started paying attention to other women. Young, naive, and married to her teen sweetheart, Dorothy spent the first year of the dysfunctional marriage blaming herself. A baby came. In 1943, Dorothy Dandridge fell pregnant. As so many couples have before and since, she believed a baby might be just what was needed to save her far from perfect marriage. She began preparing for the new arrival to their family home. On September 2, 1943, Dorothy began her labor. Rather than waiting attentively by her side, Harold Nicholson had left to play golf, and he had taken the family car with him. Fathers being absent for a child's birth was not uncommon in the 1940s, but it was still not a reassuring sign. At first, Dorothy insisted on waiting for Harold's return before finally relenting and going to the hospital without him. The child was a daughter who they named Harolyn. Now there were 3 people in the family, and it still wasn't working. Everything was against her. At the start of 1944, Dorothy Dandridge was a young black mother, with a largely absent and almost certainly unfaithful husband, trying to break her way into Hollywood. Not only was she forced to try and raise an infant while her husband was busy running around with other women, she was trying to build a career in a world rife with racism and sexism. As was standard at the time for black female actors, most of the mainstream roles Dorothy was offered were to play maids. Dorothy stood firm in refusing roles of this nature and was eventually rewarded in 1951 with a major supporting role as Melmendy, Queen of the Ashuba in the RKO picture, Tarzan's Peril. It was a huge opportunity, but Hollywood had one more knife waiting for the actor on the verge of her big break. Her outfits, the critics said, were too revealing. She owned her controversy. While the scandal was much more damaging to Hollywood actors in the 1950s than it is today, especially for women, and even more so for black women, controversy still had its advantages. The frenzy around the skimpy outfits and, as the censors put it, blunt sexuality of Tarzan's Peril meant Dorothy Dandridge quickly became a household name. The actor became such a hot topic she was invited to be the cover stay of Ebony magazine. She was suddenly in a great position and on the brink of real stardom. Sadly, every silver lining has a cloud. Harold Nicholson had left his wife and child altogether by 1948, and the background to all Dorothy's success was an ongoing divorce. The separation of Harold and Dorothy was finalized in October 1951, just 6 months after her Ebony cover shoot. A new image. The upside of Dorothy Dandridge's divorce was that, for the first time in her life, she was completely free to make her own path. As a child, she had been heavily controlled by her 2 moms. As a young adult, even considering his common absences, Dorothy was continually influenced by her husband. Now, she was a 29-year-old woman in control of her own destiny, and she soon met a man who was keen to help her. The 33-year-old jazz pianist Fillmore helped Dorothy move in a new direction. She leaned into a sexier image and began playing nightclub shows. On the surface, it sounds like a classic case of a man taking advantage of a woman in a vulnerable position, but that was not the case. It was actually a great move for Dorothy's career. In April 1951, the act Dorothy Dandridge put together with Fillmore debuted at the Macambo, Hollywood's coolest nightclub for more than a decade. They were a huge hit and were quickly booked for more shows at the Macambo as well as in other clubs around Los Angeles, America, and the rest of the world. Dorothy was a bona fide star who was headlining wherever she went. Once more, this should have been the start of Dorothy's happy ever after story. No matter how successful she was becoming, however, there was one thing about Dorothy Dandridge which would always be used to undermine her achievements. This was segregation-era USA, and Dorothy was black. She wasn't treated as an equal. While she was on stage, Dorothy Dandridge was the star of the show and the most important person in the room, but that changed quickly as soon as the show was over. Under segregation, Dorothy was denied access to any common public areas in most of the hotels and nightclubs she played. The star wasn't permitted to share toilets, elevators, or the lobby with the white customers or acts. She wasn't even allowed to directly address the audience members she had just been singing to. Where the white acts lower on the bill were given dressing rooms, Dorothy was shuffled into a storage closet. It was a lot to deal with, and, as much as she tried not to let it get to her, it began to wear Dorothy down, and she was soon using alcohol and pills to soften the hurt and anger the situation caused her every day. A new man. Now single, Dorothy Dandridge was in a position to be swept off her feet, and that's exactly what happened when the British-born actor Peter Lawford walked into her Las Vegas show one night. She liked him, he liked her, and they quickly tumbled into a relationship. The problem was, Dorothy was black and Peter was white. The lovers had to be discreet, as a public interracial relationship could be catastrophic for both their careers. Close friends were trusted with the truth of their love affair, but, eventually, Dorothy and Peter had to admit their love could never lead to marriage, and they decided to end things early. They knew the pain of a split would only grow the longer they were together. She said, "No. For every part of Las Vegas that is glamorous and exciting, there is an equal part that is seedy and dangerous. Dorothy Dandridge was earning good money during her time in Sin City, but she was also encountering much of its downside, especially from men. One evening, she was put into a situation which many women, particularly in show business, have found themselves in before and since. Dorothy was invited to a party hosted by the studio executive Harry Cohn in one of the famous Vegas hotels. Only, when she arrived, it wasn't a party at all. Dorothy found herself alone with the predatory Cohn and, inevitably but still disappointingly, she was soon propositioned for a physical encounter in exchange for help with her career. Dorothy Dandridge took a deep breath, thought about how this man could damage her career if she refused him, and left the room anyway. She made good friends. Where, like so many, Dorothy Dandridge had been let down by the behavior of men, she did find support in the company of women. The first was the My Friend Irma actor Marie Wilson, who approached Dorothy after a Las Vegas show and initiated an instant friendship. Moments after they met, Dorothy's new friend introduced her to the editor of Life magazine and sparked conversations about a photo spread that would be a huge boost to Dorothy's career. The second woman who came to the aid of Dorothy was her publicist. She called Dorothy to tell her that, as the most beautiful woman on her books, she should meet the most beautiful man on her books. That man was the now legendary Harry Belafonte. A meeting was arranged. The chemistry between Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte was immediate and, even though Harry was still technically married to Marguerite Bird, they began an under-the-radar affair. It wasn't right between them, however, and things soon became strained. Both parties were amateur enthusiasts of psychoanalysis, so their arguments were filled with half-understood buzzwords picked up from therapists and theory books. Before long, the romantic spark between Dorothy and Harry fizzled out completely, but that wasn't the end of their story together. In 1953, Harry Belafonte made his movie debut in the MGM movie, Bright Road. It was an inspirational movie where a teacher tried to get through to a struggling student. That teacher, the lead role, was played by Dorothy Dandridge. It was a huge role for Dorothy, who was finally playing a genuine Hollywood-led and not one of the stock characters usually given to black actors. Carmen. After Bright Road came the movie that would finally position Dorothy Dandridge as an indisputable Hollywood superstar. Rebellious Austro-Hungarian director Otto Preminger was adapting Bizet's classic opera Carmen and wanted to shake things up by using a predominantly black cast. This created a never-before-seen opportunity for someone to play the biggest female lead ever offered to a black actor in Hollywood. Dorothy Dandridge was determined to get the role, but the director was not convinced, as Dorothy's performance in Bright Road had been wholesome and refined, not the qualities needed for Carmen Jones. Dorothy wasn't going to let that get in her way. She dirtied up her makeup, let her hair down, and told Otto Preminger she could do it. He decided to give her the chance, a decision he would not regret. Cold and hot. Carmen Jones was going to be a hugely significant moment, not just in the career of Dorothy Dandridge but in Hollywood in general. It presented an incredible opportunity to break down barriers for black actors. Dorothy felt the pressure and she panicked. She told her agent to call Otto Preminger and quit the movie. The director was absolutely unwilling to accept this and immediately went to Dorothy's home to convince her to stay with the project. Otto Preminger was successful and Dorothy's cold feet were warmed. That wasn't where the meeting ended, however. The temperature continued to rise until passion bubbled over between the director and his star. Carmen Jones was already delivering more than it had promised for the 48-year-old director and his 31-year-old leading lady. She shattered the glass ceiling. The affair which began between Otto Preminger and Dorothy Dandridge was risky. Not only were they courting the damaging scandal of being an interracial couple, but Preminger was married. The couple was not discreet about things either. Despite this, Carmen Jones was a huge success, especially for Dorothy Dandridge. As a result of her performance in the movie, Dorothy became the first black actor to be nominated for a Best Actor Oscar for a leading role. Dorothy also became the first black woman to appear on the cover of Life magazine. What's more, she finally got her studio deal. On February 15, 1955, 20th Century Fox offered Dorothy a 3-movie deal starting at $75,000 a film. She snapped it up. Clouds were forming. The success with Carmen Jones was undoubtedly the highlight of Dorothy Dandridge's career so far. She should have been flying high, but, sadly, not everything was going quite so well in her life. At the ceremony she attended with her sister, Vivian, Dorothy missed out to Grace Jones for that year's Oscar. She was also having trouble with Otto Preminger. The director had a fearsome reputation for his attitude on set and was known by many cast and crew members as Otto the Terrible or Otto the Ogre. According to reports, he was the same in his non-working life, and so Dorothy suffered from both angles. She was also subject to an unexpected family problem: missing sister. In 1956, just a year after attending the Oscars with her sister, Vivian Dandridge vanished. She moved away, spending time variously in New York and the south of France, and stopped communicating with Dorothy or any of her other former friends and family. Concerned and upset, Dorothy hired a private investigator to track down her missing sister. Bad advice. With the success of Carmen Jones under her belt, and a 3-movie contract to get started with, Dorothy Dandridge was quite understandably in the market for advice from people more experienced in mainstream Hollywood. Unfortunately, the advice she received from Otto Preminger backfired hugely. Every time Dorothy was offered a role, the Carmen Jones director told her to turn it down and wait for something better. Hollywood doesn't like to hear the word no, especially from a new star. Dorothy quickly developed a reputation for being difficult, something which had, and still does, have the potential to kill a career stone dead. If Dorothy Dandridge had felt her relationship with Otto Preminger might have been different, she was sadly misguided. In 1955, Dorothy fell pregnant and, instead of being joyful news, it brought all that was wrong with her situation into sharp focus. 20th Century Fox were horrified about the news. Pregnancy was bad enough for a star they wanted to be working, but pregnancy with a married man was even worse. As a married man, Otto Preminger was furious about what the scandal of getting a young black actor pregnant would do to both his home life and his career. Dorothy was pressured from all sides into terminating her pregnancy. She did, and her relationship with Otto Preminger ended with it. Even though she did everything that was asked of her in hope of protecting both her own career and the reputation of the men around her, Dorothy Dandridge couldn't escape the wrath of the tabloids. What Dorothy Dandridge did in the woods, read the headline in Confidential magazine for an article which revealed an encounter Dorothy had shared with a white band leader in 1950. Outraged, Dorothy sued the magazine for libel in 1957. She also testified in a criminal case against the Confidential in which she stated she couldn't possibly have done what they alleged as segregation laws prohibited her from even leaving her hotel. Dorothy accepted a $10,000 settlement for the civil case, but the criminal one changed the rules for Hollywood's tabloid reporting forever. Island in the Sun. Usually, in the aftermath of a breakthrough Oscar-nominated role, you would expect the actor to appear in a rush of other movies while both they and the studio tried to capitalize on their notoriety. Between the controversies surrounding her and the roles she refused, Dorothy Dandridge waited 3 years between Carmen Jones and her follow-up, Island in the Sun. Dorothy played Margot Seaton in the new movie, a main supporting character and the member of an interracial relationship with Dennis Archer, played by the British actor John Justin. Progressively for Hollywood in 1957, the relationship between a black woman and a white man was allowed to be portrayed on screen, but nearly all the love scenes between Dorothy and John Justin were removed by the censors. It was a good project for Dorothy, but it wasn't the starring role she wanted. Porgy and Bess. Despite its already poor track record as a Broadway production, a collection of producers became very excited about a Hollywood adaptation of Porgy and Bess which was being put together in the late 1950s. It was a movie that required black actors in lead roles, but the black community had little interest in getting involved due to the negative representations the film offered. Samuel Goldwyn had to virtually force Sidney Poitier to take the lead, and pay out $75,000 in fees to the star. Dorothy Dandridge came easier because she needed a role, but she would soon regret signing up for the project. Cursed production. The original director for Porgy and Bess was Ruben Mamoulian, a veteran director who had worked with some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. As the project got underway, however, Mamoulian began to clash with the producer Samuel Goldwyn in almost every aspect. Goldwyn soon swung his axe and removed Mamoulian from the movie to replace him with an old friend, Otto Preminger. Dorothy Dandridge will not have been happy about seeing her recent ex showing up to become, effectively, her boss. Otto Preminger on his part did not go easy on his former lover. He He announced Dorothy's performance was lacking and insisted she take coaching. The project as a whole was cursed. Negative feelings towards it, complicated production, and an expensive fire on set all combined to ensure the project was a flop before it even reached audiences. Downward spiral. By now it was beginning to feel as though further success, or even any sort of stability, was slipping from Dorothy Dandridge's grasp altogether. Neither Island in the Sun nor Porgy and Bess had lived up to the potential indicated in Carmen Jones, and Dorothy had to pick up stage work to supplement her dwindling movie income. The star was also deepening her reliance on alcohol and pills to the point her health was beginning to suffer. Dorothy's performances were affected by her drinking and drug use. Weak performances led to a reduction in work. A reduction in work led to debt. Debt led to more drinking and drugs. Dorothy Dandridge was on a downward spiral. Things were falling apart. By 1959, Dorothy Dandridge's Hollywood career was all but over. She also received the devastating news that her accountants had swindled her out of around $150,000 and left her with $139,000 in back taxes to pay. Some hope came along when she fell in love with a man named Jack Dennison, who she married on June 22, 1959, but that turned out to be a bad decision too. Not only did Dennison abuse his wife, but he insisted she stop performing at her well-paying nightclub shows and start playing in his restaurants instead. Before long, the nightclub scene forgot about Dorothy Dandridge almost completely, leaving her with nothing. Darkest days. As the 1950s drew to a close, Dorothy Dandridge hit rock bottom. Her failing career, her spiraling debt, her addictions, and her abusive husband all became too overwhelming, and Dorothy made 3 attempts to take her own life. Things began to look extremely bleak for the actor who just half a decade before had seemed on top of the world. In 1962, Dorothy took action. She divorced Jack Dennison, moved to Las Vegas, had herself booked onto television talk shows, planned a book, and prepared for one last attempt to relaunch her career. She revealed a truth. When Dorothy Dandridge's daughter was born in 1943, the actor had deliberately delayed her trip to the hospital in the hope her husband would return in time for the birth. 20 years later, in an interview on The Mike Douglas Show, Dandridge publicly revealed the full truth of that day. Once she arrived at the hospital, Carolyn needed to be delivered using forceps and was born with extensive brain damage. Whatever the medical truth, Dorothy connected the dots and blamed herself for causing her daughter's brain damage by delaying the birth. For her entire life, Carolyn was incapable of speaking or even of recognizing her mother. She needed round-the-clock care just to survive. People quickly began to speculate if the guilt of this might be the real reason behind Dorothy's drug and alcohol misuse. She couldn't help anymore. While her success had been up and down throughout her career, Dorothy Dandridge had always been financially able to take care of her daughter's needs, but this all changed. With no savings and no income, Dorothy could no longer pay for Carolyn's needs and was left with no choice but to admit her to a state psychiatric facility. This only added to Dorothy's guilt, which pushed her back to her addictions, which brought her back towards her lowest ebb. A foot injury forcing her to cancel some shows didn't help. There was one hope on the horizon, a gig in New York at Basin Street East in the middle of September 1965. Her final call. People who need people in the world, send them your love, Dorothy Dandridge sang down the phone to her friend on the eve of her journey to New York. The star actually sang the entirety of the song, People, by Barbra Streisand, before whispering ominously, whatever happens, I know you will understand, and ending the call. The next morning, September 8, 1965, Dorothy was found by her manager in her apartment. She was alone, naked, and her body was cold to touch. Dorothy Dandridge died at the age of just 42. What she died of depends on who you believe. The LA County coroner ruled Dorothy had died of a fat embolism caused by the foot injury she'd suffered a few days earlier. Another institute of pathology has suggested it was an overdose of antidepressants, while some fans claimed she was murdered by her abusive ex-husband, Jack Dennison. She went out with grace. On the evening of September 7, 1965, Dorothy had a phone call with Jerry Branton while she was in Los Angeles. Dandridge had plans to fly to New York City the next day for a nightclub gig. Branton recalled Dandridge displaying a mix of emotions, from singing Barbra Streisand's People to making this cryptic remark moments before hanging up on her. Whatever happens, I know you will understand. manager, Earl Mills, a letter before her death, reading, important. In case of my death, reads the note. To whomever discovers it, don't remove anything I have on, scarf, gown or underwear, cremate me right away. If I have anything, money, furniture, give it to my mother, Ruby Dandridge. She will know what to do. Whether or not Dorothy felt loved during her life, her funeral revealed just how much she meant to at least two people. Dorothy's absent sister, Vivian, had still not reconciled with the family at the time of Dorothy's death and was so upset at the sudden loss she was unable to attend the funeral. Peter Lawford, on the other hand, was very present at the memorial service. The man who had loved Dorothy during her time in Las Vegas was in attendance and took a role as one of the pallbearers. He was also supposed to deliver a eulogy but was so overcome with emotion he was unable to get through it. She left an important legacy. Though she never climbed the dizzy heights some Hollywood actors do, Dorothy Dandridge has been acknowledged as an important figure in movie history. She died in the 1960s, penniless and on her way to being forgotten. The 1980s and the blaxploitation movement, however, brought new recognition to the part Dorothy had played in driving opportunities for black actors at a time when they were tragically limited. Cicely Tyson, Jada Pinkett Smith, Janet Jackson, Whitney Houston, Kimberly Elise, Loretta Devine, Tasha Smith, Angela Bassett, and Halle Berry have all publicly stated their appreciation for Dorothy's impact and legacy. The latter, Berry, won a Golden Globe and a Primetime Emmy for her portrayal of Dorothy in the 1999 HBO biopic, Introducing Dorothy Dandridge. A Hollywood star was posthumously dedicated to the actor in January 1984. Dorothy was a part of a generation of women titans in the world of films, who unfortunately got eaten up by the cruel industry.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and leave a comment below. See you next time.